経済産業省では今年度、ケリー・ワリング様以外にも海外の有識者にインタビューをいたしました。全体は今後、経済産業省の YouTube チャンネルでも公開しますが、本セミナーではその一部をご紹介いたします。オックスフォード大学サイドビジネススクールのロバート・エクルス客員教授、シーメンス前 CHRO で現在コネクレーンズ社外取締役のヤニナ・クーゲル様からのメッセージを続けてご覧ください。
So no, I'd be happy to. Very briefly, so I'm Bob Eccles. I'm a visiting professor of management practice at the Said Business School at Oxford University. It's been well known for a long time that most of the value of a company is reflected in its stock prices, not in its balance sheet. Regardless of the country, regardless of the industry, about 80% is so-called intangibles. Much of those intangibles are the human capital of the company. You're seeing a concern on the part of both companies and investors to make sure that they're managing their human capital in the most effective way. A couple of particular things that are interesting. You'll hear a lot of talk about millennials, that companies are not going to be able to hire millennials. They're not going to be able to get them as customers. They're not going to want to buy the stock if they don't think a company is committed to sustainability. So there's this broad issue of how a company communicates its commitment to sustainability to be able to hire the millennials, as I said. You also saw what happened in COVID-19, where a lot of the burden fell upon the less advantaged, whether it's in terms of emerging markets or whether it's in terms of kind of economic class. And so I think that really brought to the forefront the importance of human capital at all levels of the organization. And you saw things like the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States, which is historically fairly conservative about disclosures outside of traditional financial reporting. They issued some guidance for companies to say, be a little bit more fulsome in your quarterly call. Don't just talk about the earnings, explain how you're managing this crisis, explain, what your longer term plans are. And you had under the previous administration, under Jay Clayton, the former SEC commissioner, they came out with some high level guidelines for reporting on human capital, which I think is, again, a very positive sign. They have an investor advisory committee. They did a lot of good work on that. One of the people supporting that is my friend, Ann Simpson, who's the director of governance and investment stewardship at CalPERS. And so you see a lot of enthusiasm and pressure really from the investment community for companies to be disclosing better and explaining how they're managing their human capital. Japanese companies really are committed to sustainability as core to strategy, what their contribution is to enterprise value creation and society as a whole. They need to start with a statement of purpose, as I said, from their board of directors. It needs to be clear. It needs to be company specific. It can't read like the same statement of purpose from any other company in their industry. And it needs to be clear about trade-offs. And it would be very important to know when these trade-offs involve human capital or dividends, things like that, which one comes first. So I think they need to have a statement of purpose. I think that the CEO, I think that board members, they need to be able to explain to investors in clear terms what the company's human capital strategy is. I think they should think about having the compensation committee take on broader responsibility for compensation, not just for the executives, but for the entire population in the company and how that ties into human capital strategy. And I think companies need to be rigorous in thinking about the connectivity between human capital and financial outcomes.
My name is Janina Kuru, and I have been holding several HR positions in my life. In my last position, I was the CHRO for Siemens, and before the CHRO for Osram, and obviously, when I was younger, different HR positions. Very often, companies do a company strategy, a business strategy, and then they try to add a people strategy. Yep. But you have to think it together, because every company and every organization is working with people. So whatever you do, whatever product you develop, if it's a service or if it's a technology, there's always people behind that actually make the innovations, that lead the processes. So what you need to do in the first-hand side, when you develop your business strategy, to also think the people strategy right with it. So for example, if you say, we want to grow in a certain market, then you need to understand, first of all, what's the market potential, what's the market growth, etc. But then the next thing that you need to think in parallel is, do we have the right people? Could we find the right people on that market? What are the skills that are needed? or do we need to build the skills internally? And only if you then have an answer, which means, yes, we can make that, right? Either you have the people internally, or you know that you can hire them on the market, you have the right skills. Is that then a full business strategy? So obviously this is a little bit like a short story, right? But like to get a little bit complexity out, this is what you need to do. And that means that it's not about developing a business strategy and then handing it over to HR and say, please see how you can figure out what to do with it. But you have to bring everyone together at one table. So the entire C-level needs to sit there and needs to discuss it together. You need to make analysis. What are the skills that you're having? What are the competencies that you're having in your organization? Who are the people that you're having in your organization? So pretty much like to captivate the human capital that you're having. And then, of course, like deriving whether you need more or less people and how you actually want to facilitate that. And this initiative needs to be driven from the entire executive management team, strategic workforce planning, to give you one advice. And then obviously from there on, everyone recites what they need to do. The sales people, the technology people, and the HR people to understand what really matters. I think definitely it is the CEO and the CHRO, that need to set the strategy. But then you have a C-level team because every one of them is making a contribution and bringing it to the table. And I'm a big believer in the diversity of thinking and the diversity of different perspectives. You need to bring that all together. So let's make an example. If the CEO and CHRO then believe that they want to invest in something and that they want to launch a people strategy, then the CFO says, well, I would love to do it, but we cannot afford it. Then, of course, you don't have a strategy either. So you have to bring them together. But here comes the very important thing, and I'm repeating myself, but you cannot develop a strategy without thinking people along with it. And I have seen plenty of cases when, let me take a very easy example, when people said, okay, let's build a new manufacturing plant in another country or in a different area. If you only look at it, whether you have the logistics, whether you can build a plant, and if you forget that then later on, you don't find the right people with the right skills there, you cannot run the factory. So, just like very pragmatic examples to get there. And I would say, what is the human, if you start to do that, what is the human resources agenda that you are having in your organization? How can you really bring that together? What are the talents that you're having and what is the talent that you want to access? And how do you measure the bridge between like what as is today and what is the aspiration of what you want to do? And that needs to become part of the corporate culture.